Hey guys, it's Ben. Welcome to the channel. If you don't know me, I'm a British guy who lives in Novosibirsk in Siberia, and I help Russian speakers improve their English skills. Today, I want to talk about why Russian is a little bit of a difficult language. Now, Russian is a difficult language, but really I should not say that it is a difficult language. Why? Because technically there is no such thing as a difficult language. There are only distant languages and near languages. A language is difficult depending on how distant it is from your mother tongue. For instance, if you are born a native Polish speaker, then learning Russian is going to be much easier than if you were born a native Japanese speaker. Japanese and Russian have nothing in common with one another whatsoever, whereas Polish and Russian are very close in many ways. Sure, Polish people cannot understand Russian immediately, but if they look closely at Russian, Polish people will find many understandable words in Russian. English is not very close to Russian. There are some similarities. Of course, there are many English-sounding words in Russian, but English people cannot understand Russian people, and Russian people who do not know much English cannot understand English people. Of course, that is probably what most of you are experiencing, or at least have experienced when you started learning English. So I would like to talk about which things in particular are particularly difficult about learning in Russian for me as a native English speaker. Let's start with verbs. Russian has conjugations. Like most languages, Russian has conjugations. What are conjugations? This is how verbs are modified depending on who the person is. For instance, you have the Russian verb делать, to do. Делать conjugates in the following way. So я делаю, ты, you, делаешь, делает, делаем, and so on. It is quite difficult for native English speakers to learn all the different conjugations of all the different verbs. It is not easy. There are so many different forms and different rules. It takes a long time to really master the conjugations. I have been learning Russian on and off. So sometimes I have been serious, sometimes I have forgotten Russian, but on and off for about 14 years. Let's say I have really spent 6 years seriously studying Russian, and I still have not mastered the conjugations in Russian. I'm not bad, but there are many I always make mistakes with conjugations. In English, conjugations are relatively easy. We just change the third person. For instance, he does. I do, you do, he does. It's easy. Although there are some exceptions, generally that's how verbs work in English. Another thing with Russian verbs is this thing called aspects. In Russian, they are called совершенный и несовершенный вид. They look quite easy at first. Несовершенный вид generally is about things that continue, things that are in a process, or things that happen regularly. And совершенный вид, which in English is called the perfective aspect, is for things that are perfect, things that are finished, and that's it. It looks pretty simple. Совершенный вид for finished things, несовершенный вид for continuous things or things that happen usually or regularly. For instance, я делаю in English could be I do or I am doing. So I do, for instance, I do something regularly, or I am doing something right now. Whereas сделаю is I will do, or сделал, I did. That's a finished thing. It looks easy, but actually it's not. There are so many little nuances when it comes to aspects in Russian. For instance, sometimes it could be polite to use the несовершенный вид, the imperfective aspect. For instance, заходите, проходите. That is more polite than me saying пройдите or зайдите, which is more like an order. So the imperfective aspect is more polite, whereas the perfective aspect is more like an order, a command. There are other instances when it is really difficult knowing which aspects to choose. For instance, I saw this example. If you go to a restaurant and you have reserved a table, you should say «Я заказывал столик» rather than saying «Я заказал столик». Maybe you can say «Я заказал столик», but I have heard that it's better to say «Здравствуйте, я заказывал столик». Why is that better? Because it's a finished thing. Shouldn't it be совершенный вид, заказал? Well, no. It turns out that you need to use the imperfective aspect, or you should use the imperfective aspect. My theory is that this is kind of like the English present perfect, where something happens in the past and it is important now in the moment. For instance, if you have lost your keys and you are trying to open the door, you would say, I have lost my keys. So that's the present perfect in English. It's something that happened in the past, but it is important now. I have lost. So in Russian, that's probably why you use the заказывал, the несовершенный вид in that context. So it's quite complicated. Let's move on to another topic. Nouns. Well, it's no secret that Russian has these things called declensions, падежи, as you say in Russian. At the start of your Russian learning journey, it is really intimidating. But after a while, you can see that there is a logic to it. It is not impossible to learn the declensions, but where it is really difficult is when it comes to feminine nouns. Feminine plural nouns in the genitive form. What does that mean, the genitive form? For instance, много. So много is a lot, and then чего-либо. Чего is the genitive form. So let's take a random feminine noun. Let's say жемчужина, a pearl. You would say много, I think you would say много жемчужин. Or is it жемчужине? I don't know. I think it's жемчужин, but maybe you might think жемчужине. How do you know this? You just have to learn every single noun and you have to know the endings. Or for instance, дверь, door, много дверей. I'm sure there are many other interesting examples. But generally speaking, feminine genitive plural nouns either have a strange ending where they cut off the ending, or they end in ye, or I'm sure there's some other endings. Masculine nouns are much easier. Generally speaking, not always, generally speaking, they end in ov. So, stol, много столов. But there is a strange example, a strange exception. Сосед. Yeah, I thought it was много соседов. No, not много соседов, много соседей. So, of course, every language has exceptions, but that is a strange exception. I don't understand that one. So, endings with nouns are pretty difficult. I can speak about this for a long time. Another thing, moving on, numbers in Russian. Don't get me started with numbers. English is so easy. You just have one thing, two things, end of story. Russian is not like that. As you know, один стул, один кресло, два кресла, пять кресел. Was it кресел? Кресел, I think it is. All the way up to 21, and then it's 21 кресло? Is it кресло? I can't remember. But it's so difficult remembering all the different endings for numbers in Russian. What makes it even more crazy is if you have the word двух or трёх or четырёх before the noun, that is when it gets really tricky. Oh God. So complicated, the numbers in Russian. There's a logic to it, but it's so complicated. I could go on forever on this topic. Moving on, pronunciation. Pronunciation in Russian can be tricky when it comes to the letters sh and sh. I personally don't really care about using these letters properly. For instance, общество. I don't say the sh, I just say общество, and everyone understands me. But apparently Russians don't like it if you don't pronounce these two letters properly. Also, you have the mягкий знак, the soft sign. I don't find it that difficult pronouncing the mягкий знак. A lot of English people do find it really difficult to pronounce, but sometimes I just get lazy and I can't be bothered to pronounce it. For instance, the word for school teacher, учитель, you're supposed to say и, but sometimes I will just say учитель, учитель. You should say учитель. So you have to be really conscious about the pronunciation. But of course in English you also have to be very conscious. I'm not saying that English is an easy language for learners to pronounce. But yeah, for me, pronouncing words in Russian is pretty tricky. And moreover, you have to be really careful about word stress in Russian. When I first moved to Russia, I went to a little food shop called Kalina Malina, which is a chain of really good food shops in Novosibirsk. And they sell really high quality food products. It's kind of like a supermarket which you can eat inside, or you can just go and buy food products and take them away with you. So I went to the cashier after selecting my items, and I said to her, "Можно мне пластиковая вилка?" I should have said, "Можно мне пластиковую вилку?" But for some reason, she did not understand me. Like, пластиковая вилка, like, come on, you should be able to understand that. But apparently, she did not understand. She just looked at me and said, "Что ты имеешь в виду? Что вы имеете в виду? What do you mean?" So, yeah, you have to be really careful with the stress in Russian. And I make so many mistakes with the stress. Another famous example is zamok and zamok, castle and lock. I always confuse the two. But in English, we also have many words like this. Read and read, live and live, the list goes on. But yeah, in Russian, you have to be really careful with the stress. I've also heard that if you say, instead of saying позвонят, and you say позвонят, apparently that's a sign of being an uneducated person. If you say позвонят, that means that you are like not a gopnik necessarily, but you're not educated. I think that's a bit extreme, but someone said, no, you need to say позвонят. It's the real educated way of saying that. Also, торты and tarty. Why is tarty uneducated? I don't know. But you have to really know how to stress the words and how to correctly pronounce the words. But of course, the same goes for any language. But that is particularly difficult for me. And before I finish, I've just remembered, oh God, prepositions. They are so tricky in English and Russian. They do not correspond with one another. So let's take, for example, na in Russian. Normally, na means on, but na can translate as for, in, at, on. It is a nightmare translating prepositions from Russian into English and vice versa. There is so much you need to know. For instance, na uroke, na занятии, that means in the lesson, not on the lesson. Or na концерте, at the concert, not on the concert. Another example with prepositions is k, so the letter K in Russian. Я заказывал такси к 7 часам. I think that's what you say. And in English, you wouldn't say to 7 o'clock. You would say, I ordered a taxi for just before 7 o'clock. So that preposition just does not correspond. It does not translate easily into English. Okay guys, there is so much more I could say about Russian being a difficult language. I could speak forever, but this video needs to end at some point. So if you found this video interesting, please let me know in the comment section, and also let me know if you have any questions. Also, I really want to grow this channel. Please help me out and press the subscribe button. It would be so great for me if you could just press the like button and the subscribe button if you haven't done so already. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope to see you in another video, and check out my other videos on my channel. So thank you so much. See you later, and bye for now.